Why did the wind feel familiar to her, even though she couldn't remember why? That question lingered in Nix's mind long before the day truly began, long before the silence of Camp Artemis was shattered by gunfire, laughter, and the careless arrogance of men who mistook her for a ghost in coveralls. The Nevada heat pulsed across the compound like a living thing. It distorted the horizon, blurred the edges of warehouse rooftops, and coated every step with a shimmering mirage. To most people, the base felt hostile, punishing, designed to break egos and build warriors. But to Nix, it felt normal. She didn't know why. She didn't remember enough to have a why. The mop glided across the cement hallway in slow, rhythmic arcs. Her hands moved with practiced precision, dividing each surface into invisible grids, finishing one section before starting another. A pattern, a routine. Something inside her responded to structure the way an old wound responds to touch, quietly, instinctively, as if remembering pain it can't fully name. People passed her without seeing her. They always did. She wasn't offended. Invisibility had become a strange sort of refuge. Here at Artemis, where the finest special forces operators trained to shoot like legends, being unseen was easier than answering questions about where she'd come from, or why she flinched whenever she heard rapid fire in the distance, or why certain shadows felt too familiar. She wrung the mop, her gaze drifting toward the window without meaning to. Across the desert field, something flashed, sunlight bouncing off metal, not random, not accidental, a barrel, a scope, a weapon being raised at an angle she recognized even though she had no memories of learning it. Her heart tightened, not in fear, in recognition. Her watch vibrated softly, pulling her from the thought. Range maintenance. Ghost range, specifically. The most unforgiving firing course on the base. A place built for legends. A place where, without knowing how, she felt the wind differently. She sensed distance differently. She heard shots before they were fired. She didn't know what that meant. She stopped trying to understand it months ago. She stepped outside, the heat hitting her like a punch to the chest, 95 degrees and rising. The sun glared down, merciless and bright. She carried her small cart of cleaning supplies across the open yard, moving past soldiers who barely acknowledged her existence. Some didn't even shift aside. She was infrastructure. Another door, another broom, another forgettable shape. But when she reached the ghost range, something in the air shifted. Or maybe it shifted inside her. Master Chief Riker Calloway stood near the firing line, posture like carved stone, 55 years old, hard-edged from decades behind a rifle, a man shaped by dust storms, war zones, and silence. He barely blinked as a line of Navy SEALs prepped their weapons. Even from a distance, he radiated that intimidating calm of someone who's lived through enough chaos to stop fearing it. Nick stayed at the far right edge of the range, collecting abandoned bottles, fixing a tilted equipment stand, clearing debris. She kept her head down, but her senses drifted toward the shooters despite her best efforts. A young lieutenant stepped forward. Thorne Westerland. Clean build, perfect jaw, movie poster confidence. The kind of man who grew up being told he was exceptional and never once questioned it. He positioned himself with practiced flair and subtle showmanship. He fired 5 shots, 5 hits. Not perfect center, but close enough to earn applause from his teammates. The scoreboard flickered, announcing the highest score of the day. And that's when he noticed her. "Hey, Janitor," Westerland called, loud enough for others to hear. "Make sure you clean this spot extra well. You just watched history happen." Some laughed, some smirked. Nix kept her eyes on the ground. But the brief moment her gaze lifted, just for a heartbeat, it wasn't toward Westerland. It was toward his rifle. And something inside her measured the angle of his last shot. The heat mirage, the crosswind, the exact point where he should have adjusted half a minute left. She blinked hard, shoved it down. She wasn't supposed to know any of that. Calloway noticed. His eyes, the eyes of a man who has built a life on reading details, lingered on her longer than he intended. More shooters stepped up, some impressive, some shaky, some trying too hard. Calloway's comments grew sharp, his patience wore thin, the heat made tempers brittle. Nix continued her work, hovering closer to the firing line than usual without meaning to. Her ears tuned to the subtle changes in the wind, the drifting sand, the breath patterns of the shooters. She didn't realize she was doing it. Westerland returned from the water station, swagger in every step. As Nix finished wiping the cement near the shooting lane, he deliberately kicked his bottle over her freshly cleaned section. "Oops," he said casually, "missed a spot." Laughter again, quick, sharp, careless. Calloway stiffened but said nothing. He'd seen this kind of ego before, the kind that needed to be broken by something undeniable, not by lecture. Nix didn't react. She bent down, picked up the bottle, and continued mopping. But as she moved, her stance shifted. Her feet aligned, her shoulders squared. Her body, on instinct, mirrored the exact shooting posture Calloway had demonstrated earlier. It lasted half a second. But Calloway saw. He stared at her with narrowed eyes, the curiosity in him awakening like a long-buried instinct. Something wasn't right. No janitor moved with that kind of precision by chance. The range quieted as lunch approached. Shooters dispersed. Officers walked away. Heat waves rippled across the sand. Nix stayed. She stood alone at the firing line, her mop leaning against her cart. No audience, no noise, just the desert wind whispering around her. Her hand slowly rose, shaping an invisible rifle. Muscles aligned. Breath steadied. She adjusted for imaginary windage like she had done it 1,000 times, like her body remembered something her mind didn't. "Something interesting out there." Calloway's voice came softly from behind her, not mocking, curious, measuring. She didn't turn. "The wind changed," she murmured. "How would you know that?" Her answer never came. Instead, she lowered her hands, grabbed her cart, and stepped away, quickly, quietly, as if afraid of what might break loose inside her if she stayed there too long. But something already had. Because when the next young operator returned after lunch and struggled with his third target, missing it by inches, Calloway gave an instruction he hadn't given all morning. Just half a minute left for the crosswind. The shooter obeyed. He hit every shot dead center. But Calloway wasn't looking at him. He was watching Nix walk away in silence, her back to the range, her posture steady, too steady. A strange thought stirred inside him, unsettling, impossible, yet undeniable. She wasn't invisible. He'd simply never known where to look. What made her step forward at that exact moment? Even Nix couldn't explain it. Not then, not as every pair of eyes on the ghost range swung toward her like she had just spoken an unforgivable truth. "May I?" Her voice was soft, quiet, so quiet that for a heartbeat the wind almost carried it away, but it was enough to freeze the range mid-breath, enough to reset the air itself. Westerland blinked at her, then let out the kind of laugh men use when they think the world exists to validate them. "The janitor wants to shoot," he announced loudly, theatrically. "This I have to see. Go ahead, Chief. Give her the gun. Let her entertain us." Laughter rippled again, the kind meant to corner her, to remind her where she belonged. She felt the usual tightening in her chest, the same uncomfortable knot that appeared every time someone pointed attention at her. But today something pushed against the knot. Not anger, not rebellion, something older, deeper, a muscle memory of dignity that refused to bow. Calloway didn't laugh. He didn't smirk. He just stared at her like he was trying to place a shadow he'd seen somewhere before. "You know how to use one?" he asked, holding out his personal 1911. She didn't hesitate. Her hand closed around the grip with perfect discipline, finger flat on the frame, wrist alignment exact, grip pressure steady. Every movement was textbook, but more than that, it was instinct. Westerland's smile faltered. The other operators stopped grinning. And Calloway felt something in his stomach drop. He'd trained thousands of shooters. He could spot talent in seconds, but this wasn't talent. This was fluency. Nix walked to the firing line with a posture she did not know she remembered. Her steps slowed as she reached the chalked boundary. Her breath settled. Her shoulders dropped half an inch, the sign of someone who had been taught how to quiet the body before quieting the world. Then she raised the pistol. Everything else disappeared. The desert, the heat, the laughter, even the faces behind her. All of it dissolved into a single thread of focus stretching between her eye and the farthest target. A pause. Not hesitation, calibration. She fired. One shot. Then another. Then another. 5 in total. Rapid. Precise. Measured like heartbeats. The scoreboard flickered, recalibrated, then burned 5 glowing indicators across the digital display. Perfect. A new course record. The range, so loud moments before, dropped into absolute silence. Even the wind seemed to pause to witness what no one expected. The quiet woman in gray coveralls standing completely still, lowering a weapon with the calm of someone who had been doing this her whole life. Westerland's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Calloway's jaw tightened, not in anger but disbelief, then recognition, then something bordering on awe. Admiral Hawthorne stepped forward. He didn't look amused. He didn't look surprised. He looked like a man trying to assemble pieces of a puzzle he never thought he'd see again. "Reset the range," he ordered. The technician scrambled to input a new sequence. Targets shifted. Distances changed. The advanced course activated, one usually reserved for elite certifications, not for proving points. "You don't have to do this," Calloway murmured, voice low. Nix didn't answer. She didn't need to. The next 5 shots came almost the same way, clean, controlled, delivered by muscle memory that had survived through a broken mind and a shattered history. 5 more hits. 5 more perfect scores. No hesitation. No second guessing. Calloway swallowed hard. He couldn't deny what he was seeing. He had trained entire classes of snipers who couldn't replicate what she'd just done while appearing half asleep. But Nix wasn't asleep. She was waking up. She placed the pistol back on the stand. For a moment she looked like she would simply pick up her mop and return to her routine. Quiet, unseen, forgotten. But fate didn't let her blend back in. Not today. Not anymore. Admiral Hawthorne stepped closer, eyes locked on her face with a growing, almost painful familiarity. "Colonel Ville," he said, voice trembling not with fear, but with recognition. The sound of that name struck her like cold water. Nix straightened without thinking. Her posture snapped into an old shape, a reflex buried deep beneath fog and trauma. Her breath hitched, something catching in her chest, as if the name itself reached inside her and tried to pull the strings of memories she wasn't ready to face. "Sir," she said automatically. The janitor was gone. The soldier remained. Gasps rose from the gathered SEALs. The title colonel hit them like a hammer. Some stepped back involuntarily. Others bowed their heads without meaning to. Respect was instinctive among warriors, even toward ghosts. Westerland went completely pale. He didn't laugh now, didn't speak, didn't move. Calloway took a step toward the admiral. "Sir, Colonel who?" Hawthorne exhaled, slow and heavy. "Colonel Nix Varley," he said quietly, as if saying the name out loud might break something fragile. "The architect of the Ghost Range, declared killed in action 3 years ago." Shock washed through the men like a wave. Calloway stared at her with stunned betrayal, not at her, but at a system that had hidden her just feet away from the course she created. "That's not possible," Calloway whispered. "She died, the whole team did." "That was the official story," Hawthorne replied. "The unofficial truth is complicated." Nix stood still, her pulse loud in her ears. Her mind recoiled from memories she didn't have. Her throat tightened. "Clear the range," Hawthorne ordered. "Security Protocol Omega. Anyone without indigo clearance leaves immediately." The men obeyed. Silence returned, but colder now, heavier. Nix's hands trembled slightly at her sides. She didn't understand what was happening. She didn't understand why the word colonel felt like both a wound and a lifeline. She didn't understand how her body could remember a world her mind couldn't. Calloway walked up to her slowly. "I've seen exceptional shooters," he said softly, "but what you just did, I've only ever read about." She shouldn't have asked it, should have stayed silent like she always did. But something in her broke loose. "What did I do?" she whispered. Calloway looked at her with a mix of pity and awe. "You reminded us," he said, voice barely above a breath, "that some ghosts don't haunt the battlefield. They walk alongside us, waiting to remember who they are." Nix closed her eyes. A faint flash of something, sand, a gunshot, voices shouting in a language she didn't fully recognize, flared and vanished before she could grasp it. Not memory. Echo. And behind it, an ache she didn't have a name for. The officers escorted her toward the secure building at the edge of the compound. Calloway walked beside her. Westerland stayed back, shame and fear mixing across his face. The desert wind brushed her cheek. Suddenly she understood why it always felt familiar. It wasn't the wind. It was her. She had never been lost here. Only hidden. Why did the hallway feel like a place she'd walked through 1,000 times before, yet couldn't remember once? That thought clung to her as the heavy door sealed behind them with a hydraulic thump, locking her in with men who looked at her as if she were both miracle and myth. The secure room was windowless, constructed from reinforced steel, its walls thick enough to bury secrets inside forever. A single table stood in the center, surrounded by chairs that seemed too cold, too deliberate, like they were built for interrogations, not conversations. Nix sat in the one closest to the door without thinking, her back instinctively aligned toward the exit. A strategic position, a defensive one. She didn't know how she knew that, but her body did. Admiral Hawthorne lowered himself into the chair opposite her. Calloway sat to her right, posture rigid but eyes gentler than she expected. Westerland entered last, slow, hesitant, and with a swallow so thick she could hear it. He didn't dare look directly at her. The Admiral folded his hands, not as a gesture of authority, but of caution, as if approaching a wounded animal who might lash out if pushed too hard. "3 years ago," he began, "you were declared killed in action during Operation Artemis." The words sounded factual, clinical, but Nix felt something twist deep inside her, an echo of pain she couldn't reach. Artemis. The name alone pulled on a thread buried beneath layers of fog. "I don't remember," she murmured. "I know." Hawthorne leaned forward slightly. "That's part of the reason we brought you here, to explain what happened, or at least as much as we understand." She stared at her hands. They rested on the table calmly, evenly spaced, fingers relaxed. But she could feel a faint tremor beneath her skin, the tremor of a truth trying to surface. "Tell me," she said. Calloway shifted, but Hawthorne began. "You were one of the finest long-range and tactical operatives the military ever produced," he said simply. "Not by reputation, by results. You didn't seek spotlight. You didn't want command. You wanted efficiency, precision. You built methodologies that entire units still use." His voice softened. "You designed the Ghost Range." Nix swallowed hard. Her throat tightened. The range, the wind, the angles, the familiarity made sense now, but it also didn't. It felt like being told she'd written a song the world still sang when she couldn't remember a single line. You led a small embedded team in Kandahar, Hawthorne continued. Your mission was to test a new training protocol in live conditions, but before that could happen, your team was ambushed. A flicker flashed behind her eyelids, a hand grabbing her vest, a scream, the crushing smell of dust and burning metal. She opened her eyes quickly. They died, she whispered. Yes, Hawthorne said quietly, all of them. Nix's heartbeat thudded once, hard. She didn't know their names, couldn't remember their faces, but the grief hit her anyway, like her body mourned people her mind couldn't picture. And me. You were taken, Hawthorne said. We had no confirmation at first. Intelligence reports were conflicting. Some suggested you were dead. Others claimed a woman matching your description was being moved between compounds along the border. Why didn't you find me? She murmured. The Admiral's jaw tensed. We tried, but the trails were thin and every piece of intel contradicted the last. 18 months passed before we got solid confirmation. By then. He paused. By then you had been through trauma severe enough to break pieces of yourself. Westerland shifted uncomfortably. Calloway looked away. Nix's breathing slowed, not shaky, controlled, but inside something buckled. What did I forget? She asked. Everything that made you Colonel Varley, Hawthorne answered, but not the skills, not the instincts. He gestured lightly at her hands, still steady despite everything. Procedural memory is resilient. You lost the memories, but you didn't lose the muscle. Her chest tightened. She didn't know whether she was relieved or terrified. So you put me here, she said, as a janitor. Not to diminish you, Calloway said quickly, to protect you. Hawthorne nodded. We didn't want to force your memories. Trauma pushed aggressively can shatter progress instead of rebuilding it. The psychologists recommended a familiar environment without pressure, something connected to who you were without demanding you be her. And you were right here, Calloway added softly, right next to the range you designed, moving with the precision I should have recognized but didn't until today. Nick stared down at the table. It felt wrong, all of it. Wrong to hear her life summarized like someone else's biography. Wrong to feel grief for memories she didn't have. Wrong to know she had lost people she couldn't remember loving. But beneath the ache, beneath the confusion, there was something else. A flicker. Purpose. She couldn't name it, but it sparked the moment she touched that pistol, the moment she aligned her stance, the moment her shots echoed across the desert. Calloway's voice pulled her back. Ma'am Colonel, if I may. She met his eyes. He looked conflicted, humbled, apologetic. For 3 years, you've been sweeping the floors of a range that never would have existed without you. And nobody here, least of all me, knew who you were. His voice thickened. I'm sorry. Nix felt her chest tighten, not with anger, with something strangely gentle. It's all right, she said quietly. I didn't know either. Westerland finally spoke, voice cracking. I treated you like a janitor, she finished, but not cruelly. He nodded, shame reddening his cheeks. I was disrespectful, arrogant, I didn't know. You didn't need to know, she interrupted softly. Respect shouldn't require clearance. Westerland lowered his eyes. The lesson hit hard but silently. She didn't scold him, she didn't need to. Hawthorne cleared his throat gently. There are decisions to be made, he said. We can keep your status classified. We can begin reinstatement procedures, but we won't pressure you, not now. Nix nodded slowly. What happens if I remember everything? She asked. That depends, Hawthorne said. Some memories might return, some may not, but either way. He paused, studying her. You're still you, and you still matter. She turned slightly in her chair, looking toward the door. For a moment she imagined walking out, returning to her mop, pretending nothing had changed. But everything had. Her hand still held the shape of a pistol even now. Her shoulders still carried a discipline she hadn't been taught recently. Her soul still resonated with something old, something sharp, something buried beneath layers of quiet resilience. She wasn't just a janitor. She wasn't just a ghost. She was something in between, standing at the threshold of a life she half remembered and half feared. "Can I think about it?" she asked finally. Hawthorne nodded. "Take as long as you need." Calloway exhaled softly, as if relieved she hadn't run. "Whatever you decide," he said gently, "you won't be alone in it." Nix didn't answer, but for the first time, she didn't feel alone. Not entirely. And for the first time, the silence she carried didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a beginning. Why did the quiet feel heavier now than gunfire ever had? Nix sat in the small temporary quarters they'd moved her into, clean, sparse, impersonal. The kind of room given to visiting officers or analysts passing through Artemis for brief assignments. Not a home, not a memory, not anything that felt familiar. She stared at the folded beige blanket at the foot of the bed. Her fingers brushed its surface, and for a split second, barely an instant, she felt cold mountain wind on her skin, the weight of snow-laden air, the metallic scent of winter training. But then it was gone, leaving only the emptiness behind. The walls hummed with the quiet drone of air filtration. Ordinarily, she liked silence, lived in it, hid in it. But tonight, silence felt like a mirror pressed too close to her face, reflecting things she didn't know how to name. There was a soft knock. "Calloway." He didn't wait for her to invite him. He stepped in with that worn patience of a man who'd spent half his life managing recruits who tried to hide their wounds behind jokes and pride. "You're not sleeping," he said. Nix didn't answer. She wasn't sure whether he meant it as a question or a statement. Calloway leaned against the wall, folding his arms. His eyes stayed on her, not inspecting, not judging, just observing. He seemed to be searching for something he hoped to find. "Dr. Reeves wants to meet with you tomorrow," he said quietly. "We brought her in from Walter Reed. She's worked with a lot of cases like yours." Nix lowered her gaze. "I don't know what my case is." Calloway exhaled slowly. "You're a soldier who survived something most wouldn't, and you're a woman trying to put herself back together after your mind protected you the only way it knew how." That last part made her chest tighten, not painfully but in recognition. "What if I don't want to remember?" she murmured. Calloway didn't hesitate. "Then you don't have to." She looked up at him, surprised. "Nix," he said gently, as if trying her name out in its true form for the first time. "Some memories come back whether you want them or not. Some don't come back even if you beg them to. Trauma is stubborn like that, but you get to decide who you are now. Remembering doesn't decide that." His words settled in her chest like warm sand after a storm. Heavy, grounding, strangely comforting. "Tomorrow come to the range," he added. "Not to shoot, just to watch." She nodded before she could think. "It'll make sense later," Calloway said, then stepped out, leaving her alone again. But the silence didn't feel quite as sharp this time. Morning brought heat that pressed against the base like a physical force. Nix walked toward the ghost range with quiet steps, unsure whether she was drawn there by obligation or instinct. Operators were already lined up, stretching, adjusting rifles, sharing low conversation. But when they saw her, they straightened. Not rigidly like they would for an inspection, something more subtle. Respect threaded with curiosity, caution, and a touch of awe. She wasn't sure she liked being seen. Calloway motioned her over. "Stand with me." She did. Westerland approached a moment later. His posture lacked the swagger it once had. He stood in front of her, spine perfectly straight, like someone preparing to take responsibility for a mistake carved into him more deeply than embarrassment. "Colonel Varley," he began, voice quiet and earnest, "I wanted to apologize again. What I did, how I spoke to you, it was unacceptable. I disrespected someone who deserved the exact opposite. Nix watched him. His sincerity was clear, raw. There was guilt in his eyes, but also humility she hadn't expected from him. "You didn't know," she said. "I should have treated you better even if you were a janitor," he replied immediately. That landed harder than she anticipated. He was right. Respect wasn't supposed to be conditional. She nodded once, apology accepted. Westerland exhaled, relief softening his shoulders. He stepped back into line as Calloway addressed the group. Today's focus, breathing discipline during rapid acquisition. Operators nodded, adjusting stances, checking rifles. Nix watched, and something inside her shifted. As each shooter approached the line, she saw tiny flaws, subtle mistakes others might overlook. Too much shoulder tension, breath held half a second too long, improper cheek weld, fingers tightening at the wrong moment. She knew these errors instinctively, not from memory, from muscle intelligence, from the part of her brain that survived even when the rest fractured. Calloway turned toward her, observations. The operators listened. She hesitated, then spoke quietly, carefully. "He's lifting his elbow too early," she said, nodding toward one shooter. "It'll pull him right by a few inches. And the second shooter, his breathing rhythm doesn't match his trigger prep. He's firing on exhale instead of pause." Calloway raised an eyebrow. "Correct." The operators shifted, paying closer attention. Another shooter took position, adjusted, missed by 2 inches left. "Wind," Nix murmured, "quartering from the southwest. He's compensating for headwind instead." The shooter glanced back, startled. "How did you?" "She sees everything," Calloway said simply. Nix stepped closer to the firing line. She didn't plan it, didn't think, she just moved. The world sharpened around her. Voices softened. Distances shrank. The desert wind curled around her like an old companion welcoming her home. Without touching a weapon, she demonstrated positioning, body alignment, micro-adjustments, breath discipline. The way a shooter must quiet themselves before the shot, not during it. Her movements were natural, fluid, muscle memory spilling out of her like water from a cracked jar. The operators watched in absolute silence. And slowly, field by field, lane by lane, their shots improved. Not by luck, by understanding, by subtle corrections delivered with patience instead of authority. For the first time, their eyes held not just respect, but admiration. When training paused for water, Calloway stepped beside her. "How does it feel?" he asked. She looked toward the targets, still shimmering in the heat. "Strange," she said honestly. "Like I'm teaching someone else's technique, but at the same time, it feels right, as if my hands remember what my mind doesn't." Calloway nodded. Memory is a strange thing. Sometimes the body remembers truths the mind isn't ready for. The Admiral appeared at the edge of the range, hands behind his back, expression unreadable. "Colonel Varley," he said when he reached them, "your presence here today, it accelerated more progress than months of structured training." Nix shifted uncomfortably, unsure what to do with praise meant for a version of herself she didn't know. "I'm not sure who I am," she admitted. "You don't need to be sure," Hawthorne replied. "Identity is built, not remembered. And what you built today," he gestured toward the operators, "was unmistakably yours." Something warmed in her chest, a thread of pride she hadn't felt in years, perhaps ever. "Dr. Reeves believes re-engaging with the skills you still carry might help integrate your past with your present," Hawthorne continued. "I'd like to offer you a role." Nix's breath caught. "A role," she echoed. "Special technical advisor to the Ghost Range," he said. "Unclassified, flexible, no pressure, you decide your limits." Calloway watched her with quiet hope. Westerland watched her with humbled admiration. Even the wind seemed to pause. Nix thought of the mop, the gray uniform, the silence she hid behind, the fear of remembering, the fear of forgetting, the fear of being nothing more than the broken pieces someone else left behind. But out there on the range, standing beside soldiers who listened to her, improved because of her, trusted her, she didn't feel broken. She felt useful. "I'll accept," she said softly. Hawthorne nodded once firmly. Calloway smiled. And for the first time since she arrived at Artemis, Nyx felt something crack open in her chest. Not pain. Possibility. Why did helping others shoot straight feel easier than aiming her own life? That question followed Nyx across the next months like a quiet shadow, never loud enough to overwhelm her, never soft enough to ignore. 6 months had passed since she first stepped onto the firing line as more than a janitor. The ghost range no longer felt like a strange relic she didn't understand. It felt familiar, not in the way memory works, but the way instinct does, wordless, unexplainable, deeply rooted. The desert wind curled around her ankles as she walked the length of the course. Operators snapped to attention out of habit when she approached, but she waved them off gently. She wasn't here to command them. She was here to guide them. The difference mattered. A young SEAL, barely 24, lay prone at the farthest station, struggling with a shot plagued by unpredictable crosswind. Sweat dripped from his brow as he squinted through the scope. "I don't get it," he muttered. "Wind keeps shifting." Nyx crouched beside him, eyes scanning the flags, the sand, the subtle bends of heat over the targets. "It's not shifting," she said softly. "It's tunneling." He frowned. "Tunneling." She pointed. "There's a heat pocket between targets 2 and 3. It's creating a false tailwind. Ignore it. Trust the flags on the ridge instead." He adjusted. Fired. Hit dead center. "Damn," he whispered. "How did you?" "I've missed that shot more times than I want to admit," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "The desert isn't your enemy, it's your teacher." He nodded, face glowing with the pride of a breakthrough earned, not handed. Calloway approached from behind, arms crossed. "Your class listens to you better than they ever listened to me." Nyx glanced at him. "They respect you." "They respect you too," he said. "Difference is, you show them how to be better without making them feel small." She didn't know how to respond to that. Compliments still felt like walking on unfamiliar ground, soft, unstable, confusing. "I'm just trying to help," she murmured. "And you're doing more than that." His voice softened. "You're rebuilding yourself in the process. You know that, right?" She didn't answer, but she felt it. Not fully. Not clearly. But slowly. Piece by piece. Memory hadn't returned, not in the way she expected, not in clear scenes or recovered battles. Instead, it returned in scattered sensations. The way her shoulder settled under recoil, the way her body aligned to wind shifts, the way she moved without needing to think. These scraps of who she had been were stitching themselves into who she was becoming. Still, the nights were harder. Every evening after the sun dipped past the mountains, a quiet ache crept into her chest. The ache of not knowing, of being a story told to her by others, not lived by her own mind. She didn't know how to reconcile it. Dr. Reeves helped, patiently, gently. Their sessions felt like walking through a fog with someone carrying a lantern beside her. "You are not required to remember to have value," the doctor told her during one session. "Identity is not only memory, it is choice, it is action." Nyx soaked in those words like they were water in a desert. But on some nights, even those words weren't enough to quiet the ghosts within her. One evening, long after training had ended, Nyx stayed behind on the range. The sky glowed with the last streaks of orange, fading into deep indigo. The targets cast long shadows. The wind slowed to a gentle whisper. She stood alone at the firing line. Not to shoot. Just to look. To breathe. To listen. Calloway approached quietly, as if sensing her thoughts from across the base. "Another long day," he said. "Productive," she replied. He stood beside her, hands clasped behind his back. "They're getting better because of you." Nix kept her eyes on the horizon. "You trained them long before I did." "But they never progressed like this," Calloway said. "You're giving them something I can't." She turned to him slowly. "What?" Calloway's answer came without hesitation. "Belief." The word hit her harder than she expected. "You show them what's possible," he continued. "Not through ego, through patience, through presence." Nix felt her throat tighten. She didn't know what to say. A moment passed. Then she spoke quietly, almost afraid of the question. "Do you think I'll ever remember everything?" Calloway didn't rush his answer. "I think," he said gently, "that memory isn't the only way to reclaim your life." Her breath wavered just slightly. He continued, voice steady. "You may never remember the exact moment you designed this range, or the names of the people you lost, or the day you were taken, but you remember something more important." She looked at him, eyes searching. "You remember who you are when you stand here," he finished, "and that's enough to build the rest." Nix looked out at the targets again. The wind picked up, brushing her hair lightly. And for a moment, just a moment, she felt something warm settle over her chest. Not memory. Not certainty. But peace. Small. Fragile. Real. As they walked back across the range, the desert quietly folding into night, Nix spoke again, softly. "I read more of my file last night." Calloway raised an eyebrow. "Oh." She nodded. "Operation Artemis. They called my approach promising but unorthodox." Calloway chuckled under his breath. "Sounds about right." "And apparently," she continued, "I once rewrote an entire training syllabus at 2 in the morning because the wind patterns were emotionally honest." He laughed outright. "Emotionally honest, you said that." "So your file claims," she murmured, a faint blush touching her cheeks. "Honestly," Calloway said, "it fits." Nix shook her head lightly. "I may never remember everything, but I think I'm starting to accept that who I am now matters too." "It does," he said, "more than you know." They walked the rest of the way without speaking, but it wasn't empty silence anymore. It was shared, comfortable. A silence that felt like healing. Later that night, as she stood outside her quarters watching the desert stars glimmer above her, Nix whispered a truth she had never spoken aloud before. "I'm not the same woman I was." And for once, it didn't scare her. It freed her. What if healing wasn't about remembering who she used to be, but choosing who she wanted to become? That question echoed quietly inside Nix as she crossed the range at dawn, her footsteps stirring faint trails of dust that glowed gold beneath the rising sun. The air was cool, almost gentle, a rare softness in a desert that usually taught lessons through heat and hardship. Today felt different, though. Not easier, just clearer. Operators lined up for their final evaluations of the quarter. Some paced nervously, rifles cradled in their arms. Others sat quietly, eyes fixed on distant targets. And yet all of them, without exception, glanced toward Nix as she approached, as if her steady presence alone anchored the day. She didn't wear her janitor's uniform anymore, nor a full officer's kit. Instead, she stood somewhere in between, simple tactical pants, a gray shirt, hair pulled back. Not erasing her past, not embracing a rank she didn't feel connected to, just being present. Authentic. Enough. Calloway noticed her first. "Morning, Colonel," he said with a small, respectful nod. Nix shook her head slightly. "Nix," she corrected gently, and he smiled. He stopped arguing about titles. He understood. Westerland approached next, his posture humbled but stronger, more grounded. The arrogance he once wore like armor had softened into quiet confidence, earned, not assumed. "Wind's tricky today," he said, nodding toward the drifting sand. It's a teacher, Nix replied, not an enemy. He nodded, taking her words with the seriousness of someone receiving a final piece of guidance before an exam. The evaluations began. One by one, operators stepped onto the firing line, breath held, shoulders tense, every shot echoing across the barren expanse like questions flung into the sky. Nix watched silently, observing micro-adjustments, micro-errors, micro-moments of doubt. She resisted the instinct to step in. Today wasn't about her fixing them. Today was about them trusting themselves. Still, she felt each miss like a tug at her chest. She stepped forward only when Calloway quietly leaned over and whispered, "They want your voice, Nix. You don't have to correct. Just be here." So she did. During a break, she approached a young operator, one who had failed 2 shots and stared down at his rifle with growing frustration. "May I?" she asked. He nodded. Nix knelt beside him, touching nothing, simply aligning her body to his perspective. "What are you seeing?" she asked. He hesitated. "Wind keeps pushing me left. I'm adjusting, but it's—" "You're adjusting for what the wind was," she said softly, "not what it is now." He blinked, surprised. "How do I tell the difference?" Nix tilted her head, listening to the breeze the way most people listen to music. "Feel it," she whispered. "Not with your hands, not with your ears, with your breath." He watched her, absorbing the words like something sacred. She stood, stepped back, and when he fired again, dead center. He exhaled a shaky breath and smiled. She returned the smile, small but real. By afternoon, the range buzzed with quiet pride. Operators hit scores they'd chased for weeks. Confidence replaced frustration. Precision replaced fear. And each improvement sent ripples through Nix's chest, warm, undeniable ripples of purpose. Hawthorne arrived near dusk, hands clasped behind his back, expression gentler than usual. "You've rebuilt this program," he told her, "more than you realize." Nix shook her head. "They rebuilt themselves, I just nudged them." He studied her, then asked the question he'd held for months. "Have you remembered anything new?" Nix hesitated. The truth was complicated. She'd remembered fragments, the sound of boots crunching on snow, the smell of diesel in a foreign alley, the warmth of someone's hand on her shoulder during a long-ago mission briefing. None of it formed a complete picture. None of it anchored her to a full identity. But she no longer feared the missing pieces. They felt less like holes and more like echoes, soft reminders that the past existed, even if she couldn't fully hold it. "A little," she said finally, "but not everything." "Does that worry you?" Hawthorne asked. Nix looked out at the desert, watching the sun sink into the dunes. "No," she whispered, "not anymore." Calloway joined them, folding his arms casually. "You're different," he said, "lighter." Nix smiled faintly. "I think I've stopped chasing ghosts." "Good," he replied softly, "because you're not one." That night, she remained on the range long after everyone else had returned to the barracks. The sky stretched above her in deep blue velvet, scattered with stars that shimmered like distant lanterns. She walked toward the farthest target, boots crunching over the hardened ground. And then she sat, right there on the cool sand, staring at the line of silhouettes she once designed without remembering designing them. The breeze brushed her cheek, soft, familiar, almost affectionate. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of what she didn't know. She wasn't afraid of remembering. She wasn't afraid of forgetting. She simply existed, whole in a way that didn't require restoration. There were still things she hoped to understand, still pasts she wished she could reclaim, still faces she longed to remember, but she wasn't defined by absence anymore. She was defined by presence, by choice, by the life she was building now, shot by shot, day by day, lesson by lesson. She closed her eyes. A gunshot echoed somewhere in her memory, a real one from years ago, a storm of sand, a cry. a hand reaching for hers. But the image didn't hurt this time, it didn't break her. It simply drifted through her, quiet as a whisper, gentle as breath. "I may never know everything," she said into the wind. "And that's all right." She stood and walked back toward the lights of Camp Artemis, toward Calloway, toward the operators, toward the future waiting for her. Toward herself. Silent. Steady. Seen. Not the ghost of Colonel Varley. Not the shadows of who she was. But something new. Something whole. Something earned. As she approached the barracks, the wind carried her words away, soft, almost poetic. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak," she murmured. "It simply acts."